Russian troops have managed to use a new offensive tactic that is already threatening Ukraine with the biggest frontline crisis since the spring of 2022 year. This time we are not talking about the usual position battles and gradual advance, but about a method that military sources call infiltration. This word is unofficial, but it accurately conveys the essence of what is happening. Troops no longer storm every landing, every point of defense, but slowly and stealthily pass deep into the enemy location, bypassing major resistance nodes and not engaging in unnecessary fighting. When there are many such groups, the front simply collapses. Now this is exactly what is happening in the Dobropillia area. A week ago, it seemed that it would be a long time before the fighting for the city and Pokrovsk would remain the key direction. However, the situation has changed rapidly. Russian units have managed to advance about 15 kilometers inland and find themselves dangerously close to the key rear node of the Ukrainian defense. If Dobropillia was lost, the road to Kramatorsk and Konstantinovka would be jeopardized, which would open up the possibility of an offensive on the entire Kramatorsk agglomeration. This infiltration tactic was made possible because of the extremely low infantry density on Ukraine's first line of defense. The front line today is not a continuous chain of fortifications, but a network of camouflage points where soldiers spend long weeks underground, almost never rising to the surface so as not to give themselves away to reconnaissance drones. The emphasis is on so-called extermination zones, where any movement is hit by drones or artillery. But now it turns out that even such zones can be bypassed if you move slowly and stealthily, moving literally from one basement to another, receiving supplies with small drops from drones. Such an operation has already been tested near Pokrovsk. Its results were limited then, but the experience was taken into account, and the infiltration became much larger at Dobropillia. Ukrainian sources admit that the front here has sagged faster than they expected. Although on maps it looks like a sharp breakthrough in a matter of days, in reality the advance continued for weeks, but covertly. Now the Russian troops face the task of building on the success before Kiev has time to move reserves. The situation is complicated by the fact that tension remains almost along the entire front line. In addition to Dobropillia, heavy fighting is taking place near Pokrovsk, in the South Donetsk direction, near Kupiansk and Liman. Ukrainian troops have to hold the lines near Sumy, Volchansk, and Zaporizhia, as well as prepare for possible landings near Kherson. Under such conditions, the transfer of reserves from one area to another is fraught with a new breakthrough in another place. The situation is so acute that some analysts are already predicting that this operation could become a key factor for political decisions in the international arena. There are discussions on the sidelines that the rapid advance of Russian troops could push the Donald Trump administration to accept a deal with Moscow on the unconditional handover of Donbas. This is still unofficial talk, but the very raising of the issue speaks volumes. It is now important to understand that the Ukrainian army has found itself in a situation where classic defense tactics no longer provide a guarantee of security. If infiltration proves effective in the coming days, it has the potential to overturn the entire logic of this war. In this case, the front will cease to be a line and will become a torn mosaic, where defenses will collapse, not under frontal blows, but because of the appearance of stealthily advancing units in the rear. Events are developing rapidly, and the next 24 hours may determine whether this breakthrough will be the beginning of a large-scale collapse of the entire defense system in Donbas. Subscribe to our channel, follow the development of this story, because each new message from the front can change the picture of the entire war. The operation near Dobropillia has already received among military specialists the unofficial name of a quiet strike. It is not a furious assault when artillery and aviation sweep away everything in its path, but a calibrated and gradual penetration deep into the defense. Infiltration tactics change the very essence of the battle. Here there are no usual wide frontal attacks, no massive columns of armored vehicles. Everything happens as if in a slow-motion movie, but every week of such slow motion undermines the stability of entire directions. On the maps, everything looks simple. A few arrows showing progress, painted areas, and markings of new positions. But behind this scheme are weeks of preparation, stealthy movements, and intelligence work. Units move slowly, only a few hundred meters a day. They are supplied with water and food by small drone drops, and communications are maintained through secure channels. The main task is not to engage until a critical depth of penetration is reached. Once such groups are behind the lines, the enemy faces chaos in command and control. The front line is no longer continuous, and headquarters is forced to urgently change plans, withdraw units, and form new defenses. It is like a game of chess, where pieces suddenly disappear from the middle of the board and the way to the king opens up almost unopposed. Dobropillia occupies a special place in this story. It is not just a settlement, but an important rear node from where the positions near Pokrovsk and Kramatorsk are supplied. The loss of the city will actually open a direct route to the Kramatorsk agglomeration, which is now considered one of the main targets of the Russian offensive. Therefore, Kiev realizes that the battles for Dobropillia will be decisive for the entire campaign in Donbas. But there is a bigger picture to this crisis. The situation on other parts of the front is so tense that Ukrainian commanders have to literally guess where to withdraw forces from to move to the breakthrough area. Near Kupiansk, Russian units are building up pressure. The threat of encirclement remains in Lemon, and there are attacks in the South Donetsk direction that could break through a fresh line of defense. Even near Sumy and near Volchansk, there are diversionary battles, creating the appearance of preparations for new operations. This means that Ukraine finds itself in a position where the front requires constant attention at dozens of points at once. Any weakening of one of them could turn into a new crisis. Under such conditions, even a temporary success of infiltration tactics turns into a serious strategic factor. The international reaction to these events has been restrained so far. However, in expert circles in the United States and Europe, it is being discussed that if Dobropillia falls, it could change the balance of power and affect Kiev's position in the negotiations. We also recall the closed consultations held last week, where the idea of handing over full control of Donbas to Russia in exchange for freezing the conflict was discussed. For now, that remains just a scenario, but every report of Russian troop advances makes it a little more likely. The Ukrainian army can still counterattack and cut the bulge near Dobropillia, but this requires forces, equipment, and time that may simply not be available. That is why the battles here are perceived not as a local episode, but as part of a larger strategic game, where not only the territory, but also the future of the entire campaign is at stake. Subscribe to the channel to get the full picture of what is happening, because the information fog of the war hides many key details from the general public. To understand how dangerous the situation near Dobropillia has become, we need to look at the military geography of the region. The Kramatorsk agglomeration is not just a cluster of cities, but a major industrial and logistical center. Key transportation arteries connecting different directions of the front pass through here. The loss of Dobropillia automatically deprives the Ukrainian army of the ability to quickly transfer troops and supplies between these hubs. In addition, the front near Dobropillia rests on the last major line of defense, which the Ukrainian army built with the expectation that Russian troops would not move beyond it. It was formed over a long period of time using fortifications tied to natural boundaries. But now, if the breakthrough continues to develop, the very idea of this line will be in question. A breakthrough in the center of Donbas makes all sections of this defense vulnerable, even those tens of kilometers away from the battle area. Ukrainian units on the front line have been living and fighting for several years now, in conditions where saturation of the first front line with infantry is simply impossible. The development of drones, artillery, and high-precision weapons has led to the fact that any dense concentration of people quickly becomes a target. Troops therefore hide in camouflage points, coming to the surface only to repel attacks. This approach used to hold hundreds of kilometers of front line with small forces, but now it is turning against Ukraine itself. Infiltration hits precisely the weaknesses of this system. Stealthy groups of Russian troops bypass the extermination zones and find themselves in the rear without unnecessary fighting. As a result, the enemy is forced to withdraw units to avoid encirclement, and the front breaks down in unexpected places. One thing is important for Ukraine now: to have time to stabilize the situation. This means transferring reserves, even if it means weakening other areas. But here arises a key question, which is already being discussed in analytical centers in Europe, whether Kiev has these reserves in principle. The losses of recent months, the constant pressure on the front, and the need to defend several directions at once have made the situation extremely difficult. The Russian side, to all appearances, realizes the strategic significance of what is happening. The operation near Dobropillia is developing against the background of distractions in other areas, which makes it difficult for Ukraine to plan its response. If this strategy works, Moscow will have the opportunity to reach the center of the Kramatorsk agglomeration and jeopardize all Ukrainian control over Donbas. The international community has so far reacted cautiously, but on the sidelines of diplomatic circles there is a growing opinion that current events may prompt Western politicians to reconsider their line. If a breakthrough leads to a collapse of the front, negotiations on freezing the conflict or on territorial concessions will become much more likely. On the Ukrainian side, there is an understanding that the outcome of the battle for Dobropillia could become a symbol of the entire campaign. If it is held, the front will stabilize and Kiev will have a chance to regain the initiative. If it is lost, the consequences will affect the entire region from Pokrovsk to Kramatorsk. The forecast for the coming days remains extremely tense. If the Russian troops succeed in developing their success near Dobropillia, by the end of the week they may come close to the outskirts of the city and start its blockade. This will put Kiev before a difficult choice, either to urgently transfer reserves from other directions or risk losing its strategic hub. Any delay in decision-making will play into Moscow's hands. If the Ukrainian army manages to launch a counterstrike and cut the bulge, the situation will stabilize, but this will require enormous effort and resources. Even a successful defense in this area will not alleviate the problems in other sectors of the front. Pokrovsk, the South Donetsk direction, Lyman and Kupiansk will remain under pressure. In fact, we are talking about the struggle for the survival of the entire Donbas defense system. We should not forget about the political component. Any major success of Russian troops will be used as an argument in diplomatic negotiations. The West is already saying that the accelerated advance in the center of the front could push the United States and its allies to seek a compromise with Moscow. Rumors are surfacing about plans to freeze the conflict in exchange for recognition of Russia's control over the captured territories. If Dobropillia falls, it will be a turning point. The road to Kramatorsk will be opened and the Kramatorsk agglomeration itself will be threatened with encirclement. This is not only a military but also a psychological blow that can undermine the morale of Ukrainian troops and population. In such a scenario, the most difficult stage of the war since the spring of 2022 year will begin for Ukraine. Simultaneous pressure in several directions and the loss of key nodes will make holding the current positions extremely problematic. Moscow, on the other hand, will be able to demonstrate that its strategy is yielding results and use this to increase domestic support and foreign policy pressure. The international reaction, in case of the fall of Dobropillia, will be contradictory. Some countries will continue to support Kiev, but voices in European capitals will increase in favor of negotiations. Each new report about the advance of Russian troops will increase this camp. Right now, time is working against Ukraine. Every 24 hours of delay gives the enemy an opportunity to gain a foothold and pull up new forces. The war has entered a stage where the front can change in a matter of days and sometimes hours. This is not just another operation, but an event that can determine the entire future course of the conflict. The future of the entire campaign in eastern Ukraine depends on how the fighting for Dobropillia will end. Subscribe to our channel not to miss the key moments of this story. We continue to follow the development of the situation and will inform you about every important step on the front. The information fog is thickening, but we will dispel it time after time so that you see the real picture of what is happening.